Hey girls, happy April. Today I'm coming to talk to you about one of the behind the scenes parts of the internet, which is emails, and sending emails and receiving emails and how that process works and how we can sort of simulate it ourselves and send real emails to an address that you will specify and be able to understand the journey and also practice some form building as we do it. So the first thing we have to understand is the journey that an email message goes through. It seems pretty easy. We're sending it from our computer or from a friend's computer to another one. But there has to be this whole process. Otherwise, those two computers don't necessarily know how to talk to each other. So the way that happens, we have the sender's computer. It walks through to the sender's mail server using this protocol called SMTP, which I'll explain in a second. And then that mail server says, hey, I have a question. I need to know how to find this other email address that I want to send to. And it uses something called a DNS server to find that. Specifically, it's looking for the MX record of the domain for that email address. That DNS server is going to say, hey, I have an answer. I know where that lives. It's going to tell the sender's mail server where it lives exactly, just as though we were driving down the road and trying to use GPS to find a friend's house. And then once it has that, it can actually process the full sending of the message. And then we repeat again that SMTP, the protocol, that will let it go to the recipient's mail server, which is right there. And then again, it walks all the way through to the recipient's computer. So this is going to be whether it's a computer or a phone or a tablet or however else they're going to receive email. It's going to pop up imaginary right here with a, hey, you have mail. Okay, so let's talk about all those abbreviations and what they mean. So SMTP is a language that mail servers can use to talk to one another. It lets you specify the recipient, it tells you the text of the message, the subject, and all that stuff. And when your mail server knows where it needs to send that email, it's gone through this process of, hey, where are you? How do I find you? What's the quickest route there? Then it connects to where it's trying to send it, and it transmits the message. Then the recipient takes it and stores it until the person it's intended for decides to check their email. Great. So this language is wonderful because all mail programs and mail servers understand it. So it's their way of just communicating with each other like a whole big giant group of friends, and they can encode and decode what they need to and figure out so that emails get from one place to the other. The next thing, there's a lot of abbreviations in email. So hopefully we just have these couple that we have to talk about, but oh, there are so many more. So you can imagine there's a lot of people that use email all around the world. That means there are a lot of SMTP servers all around the world. So it's really difficult for us to make sure we're efficiently finding where to go. So that information is stored in MX records. MX is not an abbreviation, doesn't stand for anything. It tells the SMTP server where to find the specific email it's looking for. So all of these MX records live in a network called DNS, which is the domain name service. You can think of this like a phone book for the internet. So if you know someone's name, but you don't know their phone number, you used to be able to look it up in a phone book. They don't really send phone books around anymore. We've decided they're kind of a waste of paper, but this used to be how you would find someone's phone number if you didn't know it. Likewise, if you didn't know their address and you wanted to drive to their house, you would use that, and then you'd use a map to look it up because we didn't have GPS. But DNS does the same thing for the internet. So anytime you type a website into your browser, like google.com, there is a process where DNS helps your computer find how to go and get to where google.com lives and bring all the content back from it and show it to you on your screen. That's why sometimes websites take longer to load because that process takes longer. And but that's what DNS is doing for us. It's the service that we can use to find the location of anything on the internet, including mail servers, so that we can securely and safely deliver emails. Okay, so that's a whole lot of words. You can really impress someone if you memorize all of this and be able to tell them how this works. But realistically, we want to know, how can we practice this? How can we see this happen in front of our eyes? So we have sort of obfuscated a little bit of the more intensive code on this, because normally the way this would work is you would open up your nice little email client here, you'd click compose, you'd write up what you wanted to write up, you'd say who it needs to go to, you'd click send, and in this case, Gmail, the provider for our Girls Code Club email, would handle everything else for you. It would go and find out where your friend's email is. Maybe it's also a Gmail address. Maybe it's a school address. Maybe it's something else, and it'll make sure it gets delivered there. But because we want to be able to also practice it in the world of CodePen, as opposed to just sending emails to each other, which while fun, doesn't really give us a lot of practice, we are using a library in JavaScript that lets us send on behalf of our Gmail address. So there's two options for how we can do this. You can either start a new CodePen completely, in which case what you're going to end up with is a template that gives you a little bit of code that's already written for you. And then from there, you can style it up and decorate it and add some stuff we talk about later on to make it a little more interesting. But all of the stuff will already be there. If you're just looking to kind of investigate, but you don't want to mess up anything you've already been working on and you're concerned about adding a lot more code to it, this would be a good option to do. These steps right here will walk you through it. It's very simple, and I will walk through it with you real quick as well. So we're going to open up CodePen, and up here in our top left corner, make sure you're logged in as our group. In the top left corner here, we have the create pen. Normally you would just click the word pen. We have this little arrow. We need to click the arrow. We need to come down to from template, and we click that, and we see a template called template emails, dash emails. We click that, and it's going to open this up here. Expand this just so it's a little clearer. So this is all now code that's been written for you, that all you need to do, the first thing is save this as something you'll remember, because otherwise if it gets saved as untitled, it is impossible to find later. So really, so now we have that. Okay. I'm going to do both of the steps for walking through how to get started, and then we'll actually talk about what's in here. So we have all of that. We've done top left corner, we clicked from template, it expanded, we click template emails, and then we get everything else, and we need to rename it to something with your name. Done with option one. Option two, let's say you really like what you've been building here, and you want to be able to add down at the bottom somewhere below your emojis and your Fanatic pictures and the forms we already have, you want to be able to add your email form down here. In that case, we just need to do really one thing. So you'll see that at the top corner of every CodePen, there is this button that says settings. If we click settings, it's going to open up a modal window, which is just an overlay window on top of everything. And then one of the settings of the three, there's one for each of the types of languages that we work in. We're going to want to go to the one that says JavaScript. And you're going to notice that there's these areas down here. You'll see JavaScript's highlighted now. Down here, there's these areas to add what are called external files or external scripts. So this is CodePen's way of letting you, if you had a library you wanted to use, or you had some very specific thing you wanted to take advantage of, you don't have to go rewrite all the JavaScript code or copy and paste it into CodePen. You can include the file in here, and then as CodePen processes all the code, every time it's going to show you on the right, it's going to make sure that these things are also factored in, which is great. So we need to add two different things. We need to add this first one, which is actually the library that we're using the JavaScript library we're using to send any emails out of this. And then the second one is actually a very small JavaScript function that we wrote that will allow it to communicate with that library without anyone having to worry about credentials and all of that kind of stuff. So I can actually show you exactly. And for the record, the template just includes both of these already in that settings, and then also includes this code. So really all you're doing in this step is adding those external things, and then you're going to include the form code wherever you want to put it in your own project. So let's just look real quick here. you can see this is the function that's being included, and that this is why you can see it has the initialization of the library, and then it's doing this sending, and it's telling it how we're sending and what service we should use and all of that stuff. So it's not overwhelmingly complicated. It's just there's a lot of ways to mistype some of these, and it doesn't seem very fun for anybody to have to try to deal with that. So we just decided it'd be easier if we brought it all the way down. And now all you have to do is you're going to have access to this nice function called send email, which will take in a couple of things and it will send the email for you. Talk about that in a second. But these are the two things we have to make sure that come in here. So, okay, so let's say we do want to use our existing pen. I'm really excited about the Fanatic. I want to keep him around. I'm going to come in here and one by one, because these are just single lines of text, I'm hopeful that the PDF format will allow this to be copyable without any funky formatting or anything else. Sometimes code gets a little bit messed up when we copy and paste it, but I'm very hopeful this won't. If it does, let me know, because I can also just send these out directly in an email so they can be more easily text copied. Okay, so let's say we got the first one, it's in my clipboard. I come in here, I'm going to click settings. You can see I'm already coming in here to JavaScript. So this is where we need to add this. I'm going to paste it, got one. I'm going to come back over. I'm going to get my second one. I'm going to copy it. I'm not doing this with keyboard shortcuts so that it's very, very clear what I'm doing. And I'm going to paste it. And then I'm going to say save and close. It's saved. We're good. It's not going to look any different because all I've done, again, is basically without adding anything into the JavaScript section, I've added stuff into the JavaScript section. It's just things you didn't have to type. So now we have both of those. We'll see them in there. Boom, we're done. So we have finished those two possible options for either starting a new one from scratch with a template, or if you've entered the URLs for the external scripts into your existing pen. Like I said, you now have one JavaScript function available to you, which will let you send emails very easily. So let's talk about what this is going to do, because ultimately we want it to get information from the person using our CodePen, using our website. And we want them to be able to enter, you, if you're testing it, to be able to enter information that then sends a meaningful email. So one part of JavaScript functions we haven't really talked about yet are called parameters. So far, every time we've written a JavaScript function, I'm just going to write it right here. We've called it something like that or that. So you'll see at the end of those, they just had an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis. The parameter option in JavaScript, you have the ability to tell a function what it might expect to receive from your code when it is called. So in this case, the function that we created in that template right here, the function here, you can see it's called function, that you would recognize. It's called send email, name it something descriptive. We open the parenthesis, but then we have these four things in here before we close it and we start our curly braces. So this is me saying that this function expects to be given 4 values when it's called so it can do its job. And in this case, its job is using those 4 values to send an email. So you will not need to, yes. Okay, so we need 4 parameters for this, like you saw right over here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those 4 are the recipient's email. So who do we want to send this to? Your name, so that the person receiving it knows who it's from, and then a subject and a body for the message. If you ever written an email, there's usually a small box for a subject and a really giant area for the body. Points to anyone that can guess what type of HTML element we would likely use for the body after last month. So when we use the function, we could do it one of 2 ways. This first way you would not do because it isn't going to make sense in the confines of our doing it, but I think it's a really good way to see very easily exactly how we would use those 4 values. Basically, we would call the function the same way that you could pretend this was an on-click function that we would be using normally. We would call the function name, we'd start our parenthesis, and then we would have our 4 different parameters we have to pass in. So I'm passing in a recipient email. I'm passing in my name of sorts. I'm passing in a subject, and then I'm passing in a message. You could do the same thing with variables. This is important because this is going to look a lot more like ours is going to look, because of course we aren't going to have these same static things every time. We want someone to enter values, and then we want to act upon them. So we have, in this case, 4 variables for container buckets, Post-its, etc., that we're going to store the values in. We have one called recipient email. I set that into my own personal email. And then we have our sender name. Obviously, this message is coming from Santa Claus. We have a subject that this is my other subject. This is my other message, because if you were testing both of these, you want to be able to know the difference between those two. And then right here is where we, again, just like up here, call the function. But now instead of using these values that we put in here, we call the variables, which again are just containers holding those values. Okay, so now we've imagined how we would use it, but how are we going to use it if we want to use values from our own website? Here we go. Okay. So we have an HTML section, JavaScript section, just like normal. In this case, if you use the template option, is the template right? Yes. Okay. If you use the template option, this is here for you. You can see that it starts with the form right here, and then we have 3 different text boxes and 1 text area. This is the bonus points for anybody that guessed that that's what we would use here. And then we have a button that says send my email. So this is all going to look very familiar right here. Same kind of thing. If you if you started it with a template, you won't need to do this part. If you're doing it in yours, we will need to do this part because we need to make sure that we have all this. So just so you can see exactly how it should work. Let's see, I'm going to put this underneath of my other form. So now I have this no longer nicely styled because of course I put all my own fancy styles in here. So I have a who should we send to, I have what is your name, I have subject of your email, then I have write your email message here. For consistency's sake, let's make that look a little bit nicer. But really, we know that the styling of the form doesn't matter nearly as much. So if you had, depending on how your site is styled already, if you used larger font sizes or changed your buttons or anything like that, these are all going to likely take from the exact same previous styles you've used in the CSS, but feel free to go in and change them and all of anything that you want to make them look a little bit nicer or more different. I'm going to put my button on its own line, so at least that looks a little bit better. Okay, so we've done all of that. Great. That's the whole section there. Again, if you started one from here, you'll see that this was done for you with much nicer looking styling because it wasn't futzed with nearly as much with my purple and gigantic text fanatic style. Then in the JavaScript section, we just have to create a function that you'll see is being called here on the click event of the button. And that function is going to use the templates function, which is called send email. So this is a little bit interesting because previously at this point, the only thing we've done when we've made a function is use it in a button click. That's it. But you can call one JavaScript function inside of another JavaScript function. If we needed to have a second function down here below one that already existed that did something else, you could just call that function. It doesn't always have to be in a button click. You'd call it the same way you call it up here, except it wouldn't be an on click. It would just be another line in the JavaScript. So in here, you can see we take our 4 values for each one of them. We do our document.getElementById. We use the ID that we're using up here. Again, always an ID in HTML if we're going to talk to it in JavaScript. And we want the value of what was entered in the element with that ID. So we get 4 of those. We get the recipient email, we get the sender name, we get the subject, and we get the message. So now we have 4 variables that are holding all the things that were entered in our nice form, whether it was through the template or whether we just created it ourselves in our own existing project. So now, once we have all of that in here, got that. I'm going to actually do it in the templated one only because I don't have to scroll to the bottom of the page. So let's say I want to see if this works. Okay, giving a brief weather update and saying that we will respond with more information later on. We click send my email. Now, when we click this, our button click is going to call the function that we just created down here. It's going to grab the 1, 2, 3, 4 values that we entered into those different input elements. It's going to store them in our variables, and then it's going to call that nice templated function, which again is this one right here, which will use the email, the name, the subject, and the text to go through this nice JavaScript library and send an email to that person. In that process, as it does that, it's going to avail itself of all of the steps of this journey that we talked about up here. But we're barely going to notice that because all things considered, this is a pretty quick process. Okay, back in here, we click send my email, we wait a second, and we have this nice little alert that says, hey, it was sent to the inbox. Click OK. Again, that was the pop-up alert that, can give a little bit of information, but it's not overwhelmingly important or anything like that. It's a good debugging thing. And then we come over here and we refresh and look at that. In the inbox, we have, how are you today? It's cold outside, but the sun is shining. I'll write more later. Your friend, Elise. Okay, so again, that was all the values that we included right here. When we clicked send, it sent it to the address that we included right here. Now it is set to come from this address because obviously you can't pretend to send email from someone else. You can specify who you'd like to send it to, but the sender always has to be appropriately authenticated. You could imagine the trouble that the world would be in if you could pretend to send emails on behalf of other people. So no matter who you send it to, it's going to show up like it's from Girls Code Club Lancaster at gmail.com. Obviously, I trust all of you to be very discerning in your testing. Please don't send it to random people. Please try to just send it to either yourself or a grown-up in your house, mostly so you can see it show up and test it, because that's really important, is being able to look. If I sent this to an email address that I don't have access to, I would have no way of knowing if it worked. And most of this is determining if this actually works and kind of imagining the journey that email is going through. So please, please, please be responsible in your email sending. And then, and then we check to see if it shows up in the recipient email. It did in my case. In this case, I wrote a very interesting subject, obviously. Okay, so that's it. That's the whole process. It's really pretty straightforward in the way that we are able to do it. Email is both very simple and very complicated at the same time. But I think this is a really good way to sort of get to see the process and imagine it without having to do too many crazy hoops, and also get some good practice in on both HTML and JavaScript. So now, a couple challenge options, especially if you did the template and so you were just wanting to see if it worked and that was all good. If you're really looking to be able to do more than just that, obviously, first of all, style it up, make it pretty. You got lots of room in your CSS here. This could be a whole thing. Try to make it look as close to your favorite email client as possible. Besides that, you could, instead of just having one gigantic email field for a message, which is of course what it looks like if you send an email from your phone or from a tablet or computer, What if instead you could create multiple form fields to ask for specific information and then build an email message from everything that they enter? Sort of like the way we would ask about favorite color and favorite class in school, favorite vacation place, anything like that. So just like our welcome message, you could craft an email message in the same kind of way and then send that. You could also include an image. So we have our nice template function in here set up to be able to accept HTML as part of the text, because again, this is not something we would use in the real world. This is something that we are just using for our testing. There's reasons we would not do that in normal cases, but that allows us the ability to do things like put an image inside of this email that I'm sending to this person. So let's walk through what that would look like just to see. I still have this here, so that works out very nicely. How are you today? It's cold outside, but the sun is shining. I'll write more later. P.S. Here is a funny picture of a dog. And then again, because we're writing it with HTML, we just start writing our HTML right in here. Okay, so I'm putting because I know otherwise it's going to be a little bit funky looking, and the picture would be directly up next to the text. And then I also need to make sure that I get an image source, because otherwise right now all I have is blank. I did set a width on it because again, depending on the picture I picked, I didn't want it to take up the whole email client. So the picture that I have selected, because it makes me happy every single time, is this small pug playing a ukulele while wearing a striped shirt and his little toes sticking out. So let's say I come in and I take the image address for him, and I paste that in there as the source. So now I have all the same, I can make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. I have the same message that I had up here, and then I have my line breaks, and then I have my image right there. So let's say, hi there with surprise. Okay, send to inbox, click OK, we say great. We come in here, give it a second. All right, hi there with surprise. And look at that, our dog, he showed up. So now we have a funny picture of a dog. We still have the same end, bottom, and that is a very fun but easy way to customize this. Now you could also put more line breaks. You could make a whole thing of putting in more pictures. Pretty much anything that we have learned about doing in HTML, you can do in there. So you have a lot of options. Definitely see how creative you could be. Okay, got one more page. Hang in there. You're doing great. So one of the things you might have noticed anytime you've used email, especially if it's on a phone or a tablet, and on plenty of computers as well, usually when you send the email, it makes a sound of some kind to tell you that it's done. It makes a whoosh, or it makes a ding, or it does something like that. So we can actually simulate that as well in our fake email client. And the way we need to do that, and again, I'm going to use the template just because it has less code, but this also would work fine in here. I'm going to close my bulldog, my pug ukulele picture. So we actually use a completely new element in HTML called the audio element. Now what this does is behind the scenes, it adds this element that it's not going to be visible in our HTML or anything, but it's going to add it into our HTML solely so that we can do something with it in JavaScript. That makes sense. So in this case, I'm going to copy this bit right here. This goes in our HTML section. We're going to create an audio element with a source link to a sound file. I will explain the source link to a sound file in a moment. So we're going to copy that again, come in here. It doesn't really matter where you put this. I like to put it down at the end as far as possible, just because it seems to make a lot of sense. And then before we do the JavaScript. Okay, so the way the source file works, this can be any MP3 file. Technically, it can be other types of sound files as well, but MP3s are the easiest. They're just most straightforward. Unfortunately, while we can do our images and our video searches very easily online, and we can explain how to copy the image address and everything like that, MP3 files are much harder to do that for. So what we've done is we've started a list of hosted MP3 files that we've been able, that are royalty free and freely available online. We've downloaded them and then uploaded them to our own storage service. And then I made them all available at this link that I'll show you in a second. I'm going to keep adding to these over the next couple of days. Unfortunately, a lot of the places are really hard to search. And so in trying to find different sounds that I thought were interesting and fun, it takes a long time to find ones that aren't totally duds. So keep checking back on this and looking here. I will keep adding to it. Right now, I think there's about 10 or 11, some animal sounds, some music sounds, some sound effects, things like that, people clapping. If you or any of the grownups in your house feel capable of going out and looking for MP3 files that are hosted somewhere, the same way an image, you have to be able to copy the image address. In this case, you have to get something that ends in .mp3. If you're comfortable finding them, you are welcome to responsibly look for them and use them. If you have your own MP3 file on your computer, you can email it to us and we can host it in the same way that we've hosted all of these, and I can send you back the URL to use as the source. So if you have a video of yourself or a sound clip of yourself singing or a sound clip of your dog doing something funny or whatever, you can send that to us and we'll send you back the URL to use. Lastly, if you're looking or thinking about a particular sound, email us. We can probably find something close online, also host it and send you that URL. So this one is really just because it's kind of everyone has different preferences on what they would like to find. It's easier to just go with the flow and make sure we try to cover all the bases. But if you open up this link right here, it's going to open up a page that looks like this, which is really, really boring. But you can see some of the options we have in here. So we have like a dog barking, boing sound effects, people clapping, cats, some orchestra music, whooshing. This might be if you're looking for a very traditional email sound, but who doesn't want to hear a horse whinny when their email sends, you know? You can choose whatever you'd like to do. So in that case, this is just a little bit of a description of what the noise is. And then if you take it, you can actually copy this whole thing, and that is what you would use in that source. So you're going to set the audio element, create the audio element, set the source for it, close it, leave it alone. And then all we have to do in JavaScript is tell it when we want it to play. So in this case, we already have a button click up here, right? We've already done the button click. We know what's happening in all of this. After we send the email, we want to play that sound. So we do all that stuff the same way. And then we have these two things here. You'll recognize this in a variable. We call it audio. We get the element with the ID audio, which is this right here. So again, good. And then we're just going to call a phone or we're going to tell that audio element that we want it to play, and that's it. And it will play. So I'm going to, I already copied that into here. Copy this part right here as well. Audio is right there. Underneath the send email, so after the send email happens, I want that to happen. I'm going to refresh. Are we good? Okay. Probably should pick a shorter email for my tests, shouldn't I? Okay. So now I'm hopeful that you'll be able to hear the noise through my laptop, but let's give it a try. Bring some noise up here. So we click send. Hopefully you can hear the clapping abound. So that was the clapping clip is about 8 seconds long. Some of them are very, very short, just whoosh or earth. But the clapping one is a little bit longer. That ties into another thing, which is some challenge options. Again, just things that you also could explore and consider. If you wanted the sound to repeat, this is probably not likely if you were using it in an email client, mostly because you wouldn't want to hear whoosh, 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 whoosh over and over until someone refreshes the page. But if you were using it because you wanted to be able to say, tell someone they could click a button that says, click this button to hear the sounds of the ocean. Okay, well then you definitely want that to kind of go and go and go and go. And in that case, all you have to do is add one line in between those two lines up there, which says, sets the property called loop to true. Loop being it's going to go over and over and over and over. So that's one thing you can try. And then the other idea is, so this doesn't have to just apply to our email client. You could set it up so that it could be click this button to hear a dog bark. It could be click this button to hear the ocean sounds, anything like that. And in that case, all you would need to do, again, you'll have to create another audio element, give it a different ID, preferably that describes what it is, give it a different source value. So let's say over here, I have this right here, copy that, and I could put that in here. Oops, make sure I'm in the right spot. There we go. So now I have my bark.mp3 as my source. Then I need a button that says woof. And when I click it, it's going to call this function called bark. And in that, I take a variable that called dog, I set it equal to the element with the ID dog, which is my audio. And then I want to play that. And that's it. And if I wanted it to loop, I could add that too. All right, so that's it. That is the bottom. Thank you very, very much for sticking with me. I will let you know now, this is a tough one to do remotely, but I think it's really neat to try. And so I invite you to explore as much as you possibly can, practice with lots of fun things that you can send out. And anything that does come in here, there's the one that I just got, anything that comes to this, you will be able to reply. So if you send something to yourself and you click reply on it, it'll reply back to the Code Club email. And so I'll be able to see it if you send a reply back, and I can test that back and forth with you as well, which is exciting. So if you have any questions or if you have any issues, if you get any errors, if there's anything that's confusing, please send us an email. Otherwise, as always, you are welcome to continue working on projects from previous months. We always love to see progress at any point, so you can always show off stuff from before. If you have questions about previous lessons also, please send those along. And I will see you for our first virtual session starting on Tuesday, April 20th. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.